A massive blue whale can live for nearly 100 years. A tiny common mouse lives for, what, about 2? But here's the catch. If you add up all the heartbeats each one uses in its entire life, they have roughly the same fixed budget.
You know, that is precisely the kind of biological fact that sounds like brilliant but easily dismissible internet clickbait.
I know, right? But it's real. And here is where it gets absolutely crucial for you. The underlying mathematical reason that fact is true, why a whale and a mouse have the same total heartbeat budget, is the exact same reason why ancient cities like Rome or Tokyo persist for centuries, while even the largest global corporations almost always collapse.
Right. The key to decoding this apparent chaos is all about understanding scale, specifically a concept called allometry. We're going to decode the principles of Kleiber's law, which is basically the secret mathematical blueprint for everything that grows, lives, and eventually dies.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on Geoffrey West's monumental work, Scale, the universal laws of life, growth, and death. Our mission is simple. We want to understand how a celebrated physicist got obsessed with the invisible math governing everything, from the metabolism of a single cell to the rise of our entire civilization. By the time we're done, you'll have a new map for decoding the world around you. You will never view a city skyline or corporate growth the same way again.
So let's unpack this by starting at the foundation, the biology of it all, Kleiber's law.
Okay, so if we look at the sources, the core mathematical idea seems to be that metabolic rate, the energy you need just to stay alive, it scales in a non-linear way. We tend to assume it's linear, like double the body mass, double the energy. But what does the data actually tell us?
It shows that life is fundamentally more efficient than that. Way more efficient. The data proves metabolic rate scales consistently to the 3/4 power of body mass. We write it as m to the power of 3/4. This is allometry, the idea that things scale unequally. What that fractional exponent means in practice is that if you double an animal's mass, you only need about 75% more energy, not 100% more.
So bigger animals are just inherently more energy efficient per pound or per kilo. I think we need the house analogy here because that really makes this nonlinear thing click. Can you walk us through that furnace comparison?
Absolutely. So imagine you are heating a small house. Now, double its linear dimensions.
Yeah.
Double the width, double the depth, and double the height.
Okay, so the volume inside, which is the space I actually have to heat, that grows 8 times over because 2 cubed is 8.
Precisely. But the surface area of the walls and the windows, the boundary where the house loses heat, that only grows 4 times over because 2 squared is 4. You get 8 times the space, but you only quadruple the heat loss mechanism. Whether it's a house or an elephant, larger systems are just way more efficient at conserving energy per unit of volume. They are what we call sublinear.
And the sources show that this efficiency in living systems is all thanks to one critical feature: networking.
Correct. Evolution has created these fractal-like hierarchical network systems. Think of the branching of blood vessels or the roots of a tree. They're designed to exploit this scaling law. These networks have optimized themselves over millions of years to minimize the energy they use for distribution and maximize the energy left over for, growth and reproduction. Darwinian fitness.
And that biological efficiency, that sublinear scaling, directly dictates the pace of life. Which brings us right back to that heartbeat riddle we started with.
Exactly. Because larger animals are more efficient, they literally live slower. Life duration itself scales as the 1/4 power of body mass. The total energy budget, the number of heartbeats, is conserved. It's surprisingly constant across almost all species. The whale isn't getting cheated, it's just running its engine at a fraction of the speed of the mouse, stretching that same finite budget over decades. Size, in the biological world, really is destiny.
Okay, that makes perfect sense for the natural world. But here's where we pivot, because when humans start creating systems, specifically cities, that scaling relationship flips completely upside down.
This is the massive contrast. Organisms are sublinear. Bigger means slower and more efficient. Cities, the ultimate human creation, they operate entirely differently. They are superlinear.
What I find so interesting is that cities actually contain both types of scaling, the physical parts, the infrastructure. They still look like biological networks, and they still have economies of scale, right?
They do, yeah. If you look purely at the physical infrastructure, the roads, the electrical grid, the water pipes, they scale sublinearly with an exponent of about 0.85. This just demonstrates economies of scale in construction and maintenance. A city with double the population doesn't need double the roads. They just need them used more efficiently. That part of the city is sublinear.
But the moment you add people, the moment you add their interactions, we leave efficiency behind and jump into acceleration.
That's the superlinear rule. The human social system is the true engine of the city, and it is a superlinear system, scaling with an exponent of about 1.15. What this means mathematically is critical. If you double a city's population, you get roughly a 115% increase in socioeconomic activity. That's a 15% bonus on top of what you'd expect.
That 15% premium, that's what West calls the party effect, isn't it? It's not just about adding more people.
It's the multiplicative power of social networks. At a small party, you might meet 5 people. In a massive city, you meet 50 people who each know 50 more, who are all working on 50 different ideas. Connections, ideas, transactions, they all multiply exponentially, not linearly. And that 15% premium applies to all positive outputs. Wages, wealth creation, patents, innovation. That is why cities are the economic powerhouses of civilization. They literally accelerate progress.
But here's the critical balancing act. Wait, if bigger cities are inherently better at generating wealth and innovation, then why do so many people want to leave dense urban cores? Does West address the psychic cost of this superlinear scaling?
He addresses it explicitly because the math doesn't pick favorites. The city is a powerful accelerator, but that 15% superlinear scaling applies equally to the negative outputs. All the things that arise from dense social interaction.
Meaning crime, disease, pollution.
Exactly. The social complexity accelerates everything. If City A is twice as large as City B, it'll produce 15% more patents and 15% more violent crime than you would linearly expect. When we look at issues like systemic inequality or the conditions that lead to crises, the density and speed of the superlinear system means that problems like segregation or environmental burdens become highly complex. They accelerate themselves, often hidden away until they just erupt. The scaling laws just quantify the sheer multiplicative power of those social interactions, for good or for ill.
So that brings us to the great paradox. We have this superlinear, constantly accelerating engine called the city, which seems practically immortal. I mean, Rome, London, Tokyo have lasted for centuries. But major companies, which are also massive, organized human constructs, they have an increasingly short lifespan.
The statistics on corporate mortality are just shocking. They really underscore how fragile these things are. Half of all publicly listed U.S. companies disappear within 10 years. Fewer than 5% survive 30 years. And the probability of a company reaching 100 years, we're talking about 45 in 1 million. Companies are, in a sense, built to die.
And the mechanism for that death, according to West, is that shift in scaling behavior, the Dinosaur Trap.
Precisely. A startup is a scrappy, highly innovative organism scaling superlinearly, all risk and creativity. But as that company gets bigger and more established, it inevitably starts prioritizing efficiency and economies of scale. It shifts towards sublinear scaling. They develop rigid processes, extensive bureaucracy, and they optimize every internal system for the current market environment.
They become the perfected dinosaur, optimized for efficiency, which is what feels so good to Wall Street, you know? But if you've ever worked for a large corporation, you've probably felt that creeping inefficiency, that bureaucratic drag, despite all the optimization. West shows that feeling isn't unique to your company. It's a mathematical destiny.
It is their kiss of death. When a major market disruption hits, the meteor, the organization just can't adapt quickly enough. Its internal systems are optimized for scale and minimizing cost, not for agility and creativity. That rigidity is fatal. Cities, by contrast, maintain their superlinear nature. They're constantly exchanging populations, reinventing themselves, and prioritizing interaction over internal efficiency. That's why they achieve a long-term, sort of mid-testable configuration and virtually never die. They're designed for adaptation.
Now let's zoom out. From the city to our entire human civilization. If the social systems that govern us operate under this relentless superlinear scaling of 1.15, well, that implies human civilization itself is operating under a mandate of unlimited super-exponential growth.
That is West's ultimate and, frankly, terrifying conclusion. Unlimited growth on a finite planet is mathematically impassable. If our current system of growth continues, the theory predicts what he calls a finite time singularity, a point where the system demands infinite resources or infinite innovation in a finite amount of time. It leads inevitably to systemic collapse.
The speeding treadmill analogy just comes to mind perfectly here. We've only avoided collapse so far by continuously hitting these reset buttons, these paradigm shifts.
Yes, and historically, these shifts gave us long breathing rooms. The agricultural revolution sustained us for millennia. The discovery of iron bought us centuries. The Industrial Revolution, maybe a century. But because of the accelerating nature of that 1.15 scaling law, The time required between these fundamental civilization-saving shifts has to get shorter and shorter and shorter just to maintain the current rate of growth and avoid collapse.
So we are on a treadmill that requires a massive world-altering innovation on the scale of digital technology or harnessing nuclear power to arrive not every century, but every 15 to 20 years, just to keep the whole system afloat. That pace it's relentless, and it's mathematically required.
It's the systemic risk that's built right into our civilization's fundamental mathematical structure. We are racing toward a finite time limit.
And this naturally raises a deep philosophical question. We've just described these ironclad mathematical laws governing everything. If the world follows such strict, deterministic scaling laws, do our individual choices or, free will even matter in the face of this overwhelming mathematical destiny?
That is the essential tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
Critics of this kind of determinism always ask that. But West argues that the opposite is true, that knowledge is agency. Understanding these deterministic laws, the constraints we see over long timescales, that's step one. It defines the physics of the arena we're all playing in.
So we know the limits.
Exactly. Knowing the limits and knowing the catastrophic trajectory of that singularity makes step two, the design and application of human agency, all the more urgent. We can and we must choose to build sustainable systems, whether that's designing companies for adaptability instead of just pure efficiency, or transitioning our energy sources. Recognizing the speed dictated by these scaling laws makes a rapid shift to genuinely sustainable resources, like solar power, an immediate existential necessity, not just a nice idea.
Okay, let's bring it all together. The massive takeaway for you is that size truly is destiny. The same hidden mathematical rules explain why the efficient whale outlives the frantic mouse, why big, rigid companies optimize themselves into extinction, and why dynamic, innovative cities persist almost forever.
And if we look forward, the source material suggests that the explosion of data, big data, is the fourth paradigm of science. The ultimate scientific challenge for the 21st century isn't just collecting that data, but integrating all this scaling knowledge into a holistic theory of sustainability.
A theory that dictates how we manage our accelerating treadmill and avoid that singularity. And West suggests that challenge so immense, so fundamental to our survival, that it requires an international, organized effort on the scale of the original Manhattan Project or the Apollo program.
A global focus on designing a future that manages the relentless physics of growth on a finite planet. That is the question you are now equipped to start mulling over. What fundamental paradigm shift arriving in the next 15 years will change our global trajectory?
If you want to continue exploring the invisible mathematical forces shaping our world, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.